Galadriel was born in the year of the trees 1362. She is born in Valinor to Finarfin, Prince of the Noldor, and his wife Eowyn, Princess of the Teleri, in Tirion, a city in Aman. When she is born, her father names her Artanis, meaning noble woman. She is unusually tall and strong as she grows up, leading her mother to call her Nerwin, meaning man-maiden. However, due to her shimmering gold-and-silver hair, she acquires the name Alatariel, meaning crowned with a radiant garland. This would later be translated into Galadriel. Among the Eldar, it is said that her hair had captured the light of the two trees of Valinor, resulting in this dazzling color of gold and silver. According to legend, it is Galadriel's hair that inspires Feanor to capture the light of the trees inside the Silmarils. In Unfinished Tales, we are told, "For Feanor beheld the hair of Galadriel with wonder and delight. He begged 3 times for a tress, but Galadriel would not give him a single hair." These two kinfolk, the greatest of the Eldar of Valinor, were unfriends forever. We are also told that among the Eldar, Galadriel is second in power only to Feanor himself, though she surpasses Feanor in wisdom. In the year of the trees 1495, the two trees are destroyed by Melkor and Ungoliant, the ancestor of Shelob. Melkor steals the Silmarils and flees to Middle-earth, crossing the Helcaraxe to Beleriand. Feanor blames the Valar for Melkor's deeds and gives an impassioned speech to rally the Noldor, persuading most that because the Valar had abandoned them, they should follow him to Middle-earth and fight the Dark Lord. He and his 7 sons swear the dreadful and irrevocable Oath of Feanor, pledging that they would not rest until the 3 Silmarils were in their possession, and to make war on any who withheld them. Now this oath causes all sorts of problems, but we'll have to cover that in a future video. At this time, Galadriel is seen as both independent and visionary. She swears no oath, but the words of Feanor regarding Middle-earth kindle a desire in her heart. She is eager to see the wide, unguarded lands of Middle-earth and rule a realm of her own. Thus, she participates in this revolt of the Noldor, seeking to leave Aman for Middle-earth. Feanor, now king of the Noldor, leads his people to the coast. Now, the issue here is that the Noldor possess no ships with which to cross the sea. Feanor and his sons attempt to persuade the Teleri, the people of Galadriel's mother, to give them their ships. The Teleri say that they will not help them, because it is against the will of the Valar, and they attempt to persuade their friends the Noldor to stay in Valinor. The Noldor start taking ships by force. Things escalate, and the result is the first kinslaying featuring elves fighting elves. Now Galadriel is part of a second group of Noldor that comes to the coast, led by Fingon, which also included a great many of Fingolfin's people. They come to Alqualande as the battle rages on. Many misinterpret the situation, assuming the Teleri attack the Noldor under orders of the Valar, and join in the fight on the side of Feanor. This results in many Teleri being killed and the Noldor taking the ships. The Vala Mandos pronounces a doom upon the Noldor, warning of the woe that would come to them if they continued to rebel against the Valar. 90% of the Noldor decide to continue on to Beleriand. The remaining 10%, led by Galadriel's father Finarfin, return to Valinor and are forgiven by the Valar. Galadriel and her brothers, however, would not forsake the sons of Fingolfin, their cousins, and decide to continue to Middle-earth. Feanor and his followers take the ship stolen from the Teleri and sail to Beleriand. After landing at Loskar, rather than sending the ships back for their kin, Feanor burns the ships. He believes the followers of Fingolfin would prove to be useless. And since at this time the world is actually flat, Galadriel and the other elves in Aman can see the smoke from the ships in the distance. In Unfinished Tales, we learn of Galadriel's actions during the kinslaying and her choice to continue to Middle-earth. Even after the merciless assault upon the Teleri and the rape of their ships, though she fought fiercely against Feanor in defense of her mother's kin, she did not turn back. Her pride was unwilling to return, a defeated suppliant for pardon, but now she burned with desire to follow Feanor with her anger and to whatever lands he might come, and to thwart him in all ways that she could. With their transportation in ashes, the remaining elves, led by Fingolfin, have no choice but to traverse the Helcaraxe. This is a perilous, icy waste that lays between Aman and Middle-earth in the far north of the world. Many elves die in the crossing, including Elenwe, the wife of Turgon, future High King of the Noldor and of Gondolin. Despite the terrible conditions, they are filled with hope when they see the moon for the first time. Finally, the survivors reach the northern shores of Middle-earth, and at the rising of the sun, Fingolfin and the Noldor come to the gates of Angband, Morgoth's fortress. They smote upon them, but Morgoth stays hidden inside. The elves, realizing they can't be victorious in this way, travel to the northern shores of Lake Mithrim, from which the Feanorian elves had already withdrawn. Now that she's in Beleriand, Galadriel and her eldest brother Finrod Felagund come to Doriath as guests of King Thingol, the uncle of their mother. It is there that she first meets Celeborn, her future husband, who is Thingol's grandnephew. Finrod leaves Doriath and establishes the stronghold of Nargothrond in the year 52 of the First Age. Galadriel remains in Doriath with her husband, though she occasionally visits her brother in Nargothrond. While she lives in Doriath, Galadriel befriends Queen Melian the Maya, and they speak often of Valinor. She also learns from Melian the making of Lembas. Melian is eager to learn why the Noldor were exiled to Middle-earth, but Galadriel would reveal nothing of what occurred after the destruction of the two trees. Eventually, Melian's increasingly shrewd and accurate guesses lead Galadriel to reveal more of the tale, though she leaves out the Oath of Feanor, the kinslaying, and the burning of the ships. At last, Thingol's accusational words lead Galadriel's brother Angrod to tell all of what had occurred. Galadriel is not expelled for omitting these events in her account, because Thingol has sympathy for the houses of Finarfin and Fingolfin for the wrongs they suffered. Even so, Galadriel moves for a time to Nargothrond to live with her brother, now King Finrod. It is presumed that she returned to Doriath at some time to live once again with her husband. While Galadriel and Celeborn don't play significant roles in the events of the War of the Jewels, aka the many wars and battles with Morgoth during the First Age, she certainly feels the aftermath of these events. In the year 455, her brothers Angrod and Agnor are killed in the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, in which a fully grown Glaurung led the largest army of Balrogs and orcs yet assembled. 10 years later, in 465, her brother Finrod is captured along with Beren by Sauron at Tolin Gauroth, the Isle of Werewolves. There, Finrod dies, saving Beren's life from a werewolf attack. It is said that sometime prior to 495, Galadriel and Celeborn pass over the Blue Mountains into Eriador, far away from the turmoil that defines the final years of the First Age. In some accounts, it says that Galadriel judges that the defeat of Morgoth is beyond the power of the Eldar, so together with her husband, she travels across the Blue Mountains, seeking to build up resistance against the Dark Lord among the peoples beyond Beleriand. The First Age ends in the War of Wrath, a 42-year conflict where Morgoth is finally overthrown, but Beleriand is nearly completely destroyed, finally sinking into the sea. Galadriel and Celeborn choose to remain in Middle-earth. A ban is set upon her return to Aman by the Valar. However, Galadriel simply replies that she has no interest in returning. Now in the Second Age, Celeborn rules over the fiefdom of Harlingen, where many elven refugees, mostly Sindar, dwell under the rule of Gil-galad, now High King of the Noldor. Eventually, Galadriel and her husband cross into Eriador with many of the Noldor following them. Together with Sindar and Green Elves, they dwell in the country around Lake Nenuiel, later called Lake Evendim, just north of what would one day become the Shire. In 750 of the Second Age, Galadriel and Celeborn move to Eregion. Eregion is ruled by Celebrimbor, the grandson of Feanor and distant cousin to Galadriel. They would live in Eregion for over 400 years. Sometime around 1200 of the Second Age, Galadriel, with the help of the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, makes contact with the Nandor of King Amdir, who live in a forest realm called Lindorinand, across the Misty Mountains. It is also in the year 1200 that Sauron puts on his fair form of Anatar and begins his attempt to infiltrate the elves. Finally, between 1350 and 400, Galadriel crosses the Hithaglir, the Misty Mountains, through Khazad-dûm, and comes to live in Lindorinand. With her is her daughter Celebrian. All we know is that Celebrian was born sometime prior to this trip. Celeborn decides to stay in Eregion due to his enmity toward the dwarves. Roughly 100 years later, the elven smiths of Celebrimbor reach the height of their power and begin forging the Rings of Power. In 1600, Sauron forges the One Ring in Orodruin. When he puts on the ring, the elves wearing the three immediately become aware of his deception. Galadriel advises Celebrimbor that the three rings are now in danger, and proposes sending them far from Eregion. Celebrimbor agrees, and the rings come to Gil-galad and Círdan in Lindon, and to Galadriel herself. In 1695, Sauron captures Eregion and tortures Celebrimbor into disclosing where the 16 rings were held. But he would not reveal where the 3 elvish rings were. Celebrimbor would die from his torment 2 years later. Galadriel would remain in Lorinand, where, by the power of her ring Nenya, the realm was both strengthened and made beautiful. The War of the Elves and Sauron ends in 1701, with the Númenóreans coming to the aid of their elven allies and Sauron being driven from Eriador. Shortly afterward, Galadriel and Celebrian pass through Moria once again. With Eregion being nearly completely destroyed by Sauron's forces, they travel to Imladris, searching for Celeborn. They find him there and live in Rivendell together for a long time. Sometime later, Galadriel and Celeborn depart Imladris and come to the little inhabited lands between the Anduin and the mouth of Gwathlo. They live in the area of Belfalas, with many Sylvan elves moving to this area as well. After Sauron's defeat by the Last Alliance, marking the end of the Second Age, Galadriel and Celeborn travel on long journeys in Rhovanion. They travel from Gondor and the borders of Mordor to Thranduil in the northern part of Mirkwood. Eventually, they pass over the mountains to Rivendell and live there once again for many years. In Rivendell, their daughter Celebrian marries Elrond Half-Elven in 109 of the Third Age. Over 1800 years later, in 1981, King Amroth, the son of King Amdir, drowns in the Bay of Belfalas. The small former dwelling place of Galadriel and Celeborn is named Dol Amroth in his honor. With Amroth having no heir, Celeborn and Galadriel jointly take up the rule of Lindorinand, and are called the Lord and Lady of the Galathrim, refusing the titles of King and Queen. Returning to the place that was her home during the War of the Elves and Sauron, Galadriel brings with her Malorn seeds from Lindon. She plants them in Lindorinand, and they become the only Malorns east of the sea. Afterwards, the realm is known as Lorinand, Valley of Gold, and Lorelindorinan, which means Valley of the Singing Gold, which eventually comes to be known as Lothlorien or Lorien. There, they establish Caras Galadhon, the city and forest of Lothlorien. In 2463, the White Council is formed. Galadriel, being one of the wise and the greatest living threat to Sauron, is one of the members. By this time, she is good friends with Gandalf the Grey, and recommends that he be made head of the council. Gandalf turns it down, not wishing to set down roots in any one location. Instead, the position is given to someone Galadriel does not trust, Saruman the White. Now, while we don't have many details of Galadriel's actions for a large chunk of time before Fellowship of the Ring, we can rest assured that she took steps to protect Lothlorien and thwart Sauron when the opportunity arose. For instance, as we learned in my video on the founding of Rohan, when the people who would become the Rohirrim are riding to the aid of Gondor, it is Galadriel that sends forth a mist, hiding them from the darkness of Dol Guldur and speeding them along in their journey. In 2941, Galadriel would take part in the Council's attack on Dol Guldur, driving Sauron out of the north of Middle-earth. Getting now to the events of Fellowship of the Ring, Galadriel meets the Fellowship when they reach Caras Galadhon on the evening of January 17, 3019. She is attentive to the ring-bearer, and after the Fellowship has been in Lothlorien for nearly a month, she allows him to gaze into her mirror on February 15th, and she reveals to him Nenya, her ring of power. She also allows Samwise Gamgee to gaze into the mirror and interprets his vision with a choice he must make: to return to the Shire to prevent its destruction, or to continue with Frodo on the quest and prevent Sauron from conquering all of Middle-earth. Frodo offers Galadriel the One Ring. She admits that she has thought for long years of what she might do should the One Ring come into her hands. even saying she does not deny that her heart has greatly desired to ask for the ring to come to her. And now at last it comes. You will give me the ring freely. In place of the Dark Lord you will set up a queen. And I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair. She lifted up her hand, and from the ring that she wore there issued a great light that illuminated her alone and left all else dark. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement, and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. Then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again, and lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman, clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. I pass the test, she said. I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel. Despite the temptation, Galadriel resists the allure of the ring. The next day, the Fellowship departs Lothlorien. In addition to limbus, elven cloaks, and boats for traveling, Galadriel gives a gift to each member of the Fellowship. To Aragorn, she gives a sheath for Andúril and the Elfstone. This gem had been given by Galadriel to her daughter Celebrian, who had in turn given it to her daughter Arwen. Galadriel presents the Elfstone to Aragorn, functioning as a wedding gift from the family of the bride to the groom, foretelling his marriage to Arwen. Elfstone is translated from the Elvish word Elisar, the name Aragorn would take as king of the reunited kingdom. Now, the Elfstone is one of those things in Tolkien's mythology that has multiple differing accounts as to where this Elfstone came from. It is said that the Elisar was made in Gondolin by either Enerthil or his pupil Celebrimbor. The Elisar is saved from the fall of Gondolin by Idril, who gives it to her son Erendil, father of Elrond, who takes it across the sea to the Blessed Realm. This is where the stories diverge. In one account of Tolkien's, it is said that Celebrimbor was in love with Galadriel and remade another version of the lost jewel with less power. Another says that when the wizards are sent to Middle-earth, Gandalf brings back Erendil's jewel as a token from Yavanna that the Valar had not forsaken them. Gandalf gives it to Galadriel, prophetically claiming that she would hold on to it for a while before she would pass it to another, who would also come to be called Elisar. Galadriel gives a golden belt to Boromir and silver belts to Merry and Pippin. Legolas receives a Garathrim bow strung with elf hair, along with arrows. Frodo receives the Phial of Galadriel, and Sam, in addition to some elven rope, is given a small gray wooden box with a silver G rune for Galadriel. Inside is soil from Galadriel's orchard and a silver nut from a malorn tree. To Gimli, she is unsure what to give. And what gift would a dwarf ask of the elves? Said Galadriel, turning to Gimli.
None, lady, answered Gimli. It is enough for me to have seen the Lady of the Garathrim, and to have heard her gentle words.
Hear, all ye elves, she cried to those about her. Let none say again that the dwarves are grasping and ungracious. Yet surely, Gimli, son of Glóin, you desire something that I could give. Name it, I bid you. You shall not be the only guest without a gift.
There is nothing, Lady Galadriel,
said Gimli, bowing low and stammering.
Nothing, unless it might be, unless it is permitted to ask, nay, to name a single strand of your hair, which surpasses the gold of the earth, as the stars surpass the gems of the mine. I do not ask for such a gift, but you commanded me to name my desire.
Celeborn gazed at the dwarf in wonder, but the lady smiled. It is said that the skill of the dwarves is in their hands rather than in their tongues, she said. Yet that is not true of Gimli, for none have ever made to me a request so bold, and yet so courteous. And how shall I refuse, since I commanded him to speak? But tell me, what would you do with such a gift?
Treasure it, lady, he answered, in memory of your words to me at our first meeting. And if ever I return to the smithies of my home, it shall be set in imperishable crystal, to be an heirloom of my house, and a pledge of goodwill between the mountain and the wood until the end of days.
Then the lady unbraided one of her long tresses and cut off 3 golden hairs and laid them in Gimli's hand. These words shall go with the gift. she said. "I do not foretell, for all foretelling is now vain. On the one hand lies darkness, and on the other only hope. But if hope should not fail, then I say you, Gimli, son of Glóin, that your hands shall flow with gold, and yet, over you, gold shall have no dominion." The very next day after the Fellowship departs, Gwaihir brings a resurrected Gandalf to Lothlórien. Galadriel sees that Gandalf is replenished, reclothed, and gives him a new staff. Gandalf departs later in February. On March 11th, as Gollum visits Shelob, Denethor sends Faramir to Osgiliath, and Aragorn is traveling through Gondor leading the army of the dead. Lothlórien is attacked by an army coming out of Dol Guldur. By the power of Galadriel's ring, the army is repelled. 4 days later, on March 15th, the Rohirrim ride at the fields of Pelennor, and a second assault from Dol Guldur is launched on Lothlórien. Again, they are repelled by the power of Nenya. Simultaneously, orcs from Dol Guldur attack the realm of Thranduil in the north, a battle in which the elves were also victorious. A week later, on March 22nd, as the men of the West ride through Gondor on their way to the Black Gate, the third and final attack on Lothlórien comes from Dol Guldur. Once again, Galadriel and the power of her ring are able to repel the forces of evil. Though the orcs of Dol Guldur are repelled 3 times, there is grievous harm done to the fair woods on the borders of Lórien from the 3 attacks. On March 28th, 3 days after the destruction of the One Ring, Celeborn leads an assault on Dol Guldur itself. Within a few days, the fortress is taken. In a final act of astounding power, Galadriel throws down the walls of Dol Guldur and lays bare its pits. She cleanses the area of its evil, and Dol Guldur, a realm responsible for so much evil in the north of Middle-earth, is no more. It would be Galadriel's final act of power. Since the One Ring is destroyed, the strength of the Elven Rings was waning, and would almost vanish completely. On April 6th, Thranduil and Celeborn meet in Mirkwood and rename it Erin Lasgallen, the Wood of the Green Leaves. With the forest now cleansed, they divide the realm. Thranduil would rule the northern region, and Celeborn would take the woods south of the Narrows, which would be called East Lórien. The middle section would be gifted to the Beornings and the Woodmen. Galadriel and Celeborn attend the wedding of King Elessar and their granddaughter Arwen. They accompany Gandalf and the hobbits as they travel to Rohan for the funeral of King Theoden on August 10th. They continue with the group as they come to Helm's Deep, travel to Isengard where they greet Treebeard, travel north, passing Saruman traveling on foot, and halt at the mountains of Moria. Finally, on September 13th, they depart as Elrond and the others head to Rivendell, returning home to Lothlórien. After the hobbits return to retake the Shire from Saruman's ruffians, they discover that many of the beautiful and beloved trees had been destroyed, including the party tree where Bilbo made his farewell speech. With the soil from Galadriel, Sam helps to restore the Shire to its former beauty. In place of the party tree, he plants the nut, which grows into a beautiful Malorn tree. 2 years later, in 3021, Galadriel bids farewell to her husband and leaves Lothlórien for the last time. She is among the group that meets Frodo at the Grey Havens. Having resisted the temptation of the ring, Galadriel was released from her ban by the Valar. She, along with the other 2 bearers of the Elven Rings, Gandalf and Elrond, and Bilbo and Frodo Baggins, who had each borne the One Ring, take the White Ship and sail west to the Undying Lands. Celeborn returns to Lothlórien, but with the power of Nenya broken, it is no longer filled with the same light and life as it had before. It is believed that he relocated to Rivendell and lived for a time with Elrond's sons Elladan and Elrohir, having grown weary of East Lórien. Not long into the Fourth Age, he makes his way to the Grey Havens. There, he sails west on the last ship with Círdan the Shipwright. With their departure, the last memories of the Elder Days leaves Middle-earth. Finally, the last thing we know of Galadriel comes in the year 120 of the Fourth Age. It was in this year that Gimli sails with his friend Legolas into the west. Gimli becomes the first and only dwarf to enter Valinor. There, Galadriel welcomes her admirer to the land of her birth, where these heroes of Middle-earth would spend the coming years in peace. If you want to be a hero of Middle-earth here on YouTube and get exclusive emoji to use here on the channel, you can hit the join button and become a member. Now this is just 99 cents a month and gives you not only the emoji, but also access to the exclusive Nerd of the Rings Discord, where we chat about all things Tolkien including upcoming video topics. As always, I'd like to thank my Patreon patrons, including my wizard level supporter Tom DeBombadil19. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.